Trade leftovers for magic, said the little black beggar girl. The billionaire laughed. This story explores how a reclusive, disabled millionaire's world is shattered and rebuilt by a young black girl. It delves into the insidious nature of societal prejudice, not just from overt enemies, but from those who claim to love and protect, forcing a confrontation with the uncomfortable truth that kindness can be a more powerful catalyst for change than wealth or status. Julian Croft existed as a ghost in his own life. At 48, he presided over a fortune he couldn't spend, and a body that had betrayed him 2 decades ago. The car crash had taken his legs, but it was the aftermath that had amputated his soul. Friends vanished. Business partners found new ventures. And Evelyn, his wife, had endured 5 years of his bitterness, before leaving her parting words echoing in the cavernous silence of his mansion. "I can't live with a ghost, Julian. You're already dead." Now his days were a flat line of managed care. His only companions were the ticking of a grandfather clock, and Agnes, his housekeeper of 30 years, who moved through the house with a quiet efficiency that bordered on reverence for the man he used to be. She ensured his world was sterile, silent, and utterly without surprises. One frigid November evening, as a biting wind rattled the great windows of his study, a sound broke the routine. A soft, hesitant knock. Not at the grand front entrance, but at the modest side door used by staff. Agnes had left for the day. It was past 9. For a moment he considered ignoring it, letting the world remain outside where it belonged. But curiosity, a long dormant emotion, stirred. He maneuvered his state-of-the-art wheelchair down the hallway, the silent hum of its motor, the only sound against the cold marble. He opened the door to a gust of wind, and a small girl. She couldn't have been more than 7. Her dark skin, a stark contrast to the swirling snow. She was wrapped in a coat that was too big, her eyes wide and luminous, taking in the impossible sight of him. "Mister." Her voice was a tiny thread against the wind. "I'm sorry to bother you, but are you throwing out any dinner?" Julian was frozen. People looked at him with pity, awe, or discomfort. They saw the chair first, then the money. No one had looked at him like a person with a kitchen in years. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice raspy from disuse. "My mama's working late. We live over there." She pointed a small gloved finger across the street to a row of low-income apartments he had spent years actively ignoring. "I'm just really hungry." He saw no guile in her eyes, only a straightforward honesty that was utterly disarming in its purity. "What's your name?" "Maya Washington, sir." He sighed, a sound that felt like cracking ice in his own chest. "Come in. Don't stand in the cold." Maya stepped inside, her gaze taking in the marble floors and soaring ceilings with a child's wonder, not a poor person's envy. He led her to the kitchen, a gleaming, industrial-sized space that was rarely used. He found a container of roasted chicken and vegetables Agnes had left for him, food he would have picked at without tasting. Her eyes fixed on the container, not the polished chrome or granite countertops. She took it with a solemn, "Thank you," but didn't eat. Instead, she looked at his wheelchair, then at his legs with an unnerving seriousness. "Does it hurt?" "They don't feel anything at all," Julian said, a familiar bitterness creeping into his tone. "That's sad," she said simply. "You gave me food. I want to give you something back. I can help you walk." Julian let out a short, harsh laugh, the sound alien in the quiet room. "No, you can't. The best doctors in the world said so. Doctors don't know everything." Maya said, her faith as absolute and solid as the floor beneath them. "My grandma said a kindness given comes back like a miracle. If you just believe it can happen, it will." He wanted to dismiss her, to send her away with the food and return to his silent tomb. But her unwavering sincerity held him captive. For the first time in 20 years, someone was speaking to him not about his limitations, but about a possibility, however absurd. It was the first interesting thing he had heard in a decade. "All right, Maya Washington. He said, his voice softer than he intended. It's a deal. The word deal hung in the air after Maya left a strange and fragile thing in the oppressive silence of the mansion. Julian did not believe in miracles, but as he wheeled himself back to his study, he found himself thinking about the sheer audacity of her faith. He slept more soundly that night than he had in years, and awoke to a feeling he couldn't name. It wasn't hope, precisely, that felt too large, too dangerous. It was anticipation. The house was the same, the routine was the same, but the silence now seemed to hold a question within it. The next day, just after 3, the side door knocked again. Julian opened it almost immediately. Maya stood there holding a single, slightly wilted daisy. She must have picked it from one of the neglected flower beds on the street. "This is the thank you miracle," she announced gravely, placing the flower in his hand. Its stem was cool against his palm. He watched mesmerized as she knelt, her small, warm hand resting on his knee through the thick fabric of his trousers. "I'm sending good thoughts to your legs now. You have to let them in." He felt nothing, of course. The leg was a dead weight, a foreign object he was forced to carry. But he felt the pressure of her hand through the cloth, a point of living warmth on a landscape of nothingness. He felt it in his chest. This new routine, a simple meal for Maya, a miracle for Julian, was quickly noticed and judged. The first force of reality to intrude was Agnes. "Mr. Croft," she said one afternoon, her lips a thin, disapproving line, as she watched Maya skip down the driveway. "It is not my place, but I must speak. You don't know these people. Her kind, they can be opportunistic. To let a child like that have such free run of the house is unwise. She is a hungry little girl, Agnes. Nothing more." Julian snapped, an unfamiliar irritation flaring within him. "She was," Agnes corrected softly, her tone one of sorrowful concern. "Now her mother knows a wealthy man lives here. I only urge you to be careful, sir. Kindness is a currency they know how to spend." The second, more formidable force arrived that evening. Sarah Washington stood at his door, her face etched with a proud, fierce anxiety. She was a nurse, working double shifts at the city hospital, and her eyes held the exhaustion and vigilance of a single mother navigating a hostile world. She did not look impressed by the grand entryway. "Mr. Croft," she began, her voice steady, but laced with steel. "My daughter has been coming here. I need to know your intentions." Julian was taken aback by her directness. He had expected gratitude, perhaps, or even a request for money, not an interrogation. "My intentions, I gave her food. She's a delightful child." "She's a black child." Sarah countered, her gaze unflinching, cutting through his privilege like a surgeon's scalpel. "And you are a wealthy white man. You live in a world I can't protect her from. Do you understand what people will say? What they will assume I will not have my daughter become a rich man's pet project? Or, God forbid, something worse." Her fear was palpable and righteous. He saw his actions through her eyes for the first time, not as simple kindness, but as a potential threat, a power imbalance fraught with historical poison. I hadn't considered," he stammered, feeling a flush of shame he hadn't experienced in decades. "I assure you, my only intention was not to be so alone." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Sarah's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Her sharp gaze assessed his vulnerability, the deep loneliness etched around his eyes. "Maya says you're sad," she said, her voice losing some of its edge. "She thinks she can fix you. She's bringing a light into this house that's been dark for a long time," Julian said quietly. "Please, don't take that away. I want to help. I could help you with rent, with bills." "We don't want your charity," Sarah cut in sharply, her pride flaring again. Then she sighed, the fight seeming to drain from her as exhaustion took its place. "But she needs a safe place to be after school until I get home. And I won't have her running the streets." She looked him dead in the eye. "If you truly want to help, offer her a sanctuary, not a handout. And I will be checking in. Every day." Julian felt a surge of respect. What if I offered more? He said, the idea forming as he spoke a desperate, brilliant solution. This house has 20 empty rooms. It's safe. There's always food. Stay here. You and Maya. Not as charity. As company. I'll pay you a salary to manage the household. Agnes is getting older. I need the help. Sarah stared at him, her mind clearly racing, weighing the immense risk against the incredible life-changing opportunity. Safety, stability, a future for Maya free from the dangers of their neighborhood. Finally, she gave a slow, hesitant nod. On a trial basis, she said, her voice regaining its firmness. And we are your employees. Nothing more. For now, Julian whispered to himself as he closed the door, that's more than enough. The Washingtons' arrival transformed the mansion from a mausoleum into a home. The change was immediate and profound. The scent of Sarah's simple, delicious cooking replaced the sterile, scentless air, and Maya's bright, irrepressible laughter echoed in hallways where only the ticking of a clock had marked the passage of time. For the first time, Julian found himself looking forward to the end of the day, not with dread, but with a quiet sense of anticipation. Sarah ran the household with a nurse's efficiency and a mother's warmth, bringing an order to the chaos of Julian's neglected life. But as life bloomed within the stone walls, the whispers began to poison the air outside. Beatrice Sterling, their neighbor to the left, and the self-appointed queen of the local social scene, was the first to strike. Her property was separated from Julian's by a high, ornamental hedge. One Saturday morning, seeing Sarah on her knees, tending to a patch of overgrown roses, Beatrice called over the hedge, in a voice dripping with condescension. My Julian's new help is certainly making herself at home. Do be careful with the prized hydrangeas, dear. They're heirlooms. Sarah didn't look up, but her back straightened. I know how to handle flowers, Mrs. Sterling, she replied, her voice even. And weeds. Julian, watching from his study window, felt a hot flash of anger. He saw the subtle cruelty, the deliberate act of putting Sarah in her place. It was a language of polite, smiling prejudice he knew all too well. Anonymous letters started appearing in his mailbox. A fox in the henhouse Croft. Watch your wallet before they bleed you dry. The conflict came to a head when Eleanor Croft, Julian's mother, made an unannounced visit. A formidable woman, wrapped in cashmere and old money certainty, she swept into the house, her sharp eyes taking in everything. She stopped dead at the sight of Sarah arranging a vase of flowers from the very rose bush she had been tending in the main hall. Julian, what is the meaning of this? Eleanor demanded, her voice dangerously low. She didn't acknowledge Sarah's existence, her gaze passing over her as if she were part of the furniture. Mother, this is Sarah Washington and her daughter Maya, Julian said, wheeling himself forward from the study. They live here now. Sarah is my new household manager. You're what? Eleanor's laugh was brittle, like shattering glass. You dismissed a perfectly competent agency to hire her, a stranger from that slum across the street. Have you lost your mind? The entire neighborhood is talking. Beatrice Sterling called me this morning, utterly scandalized. They say you've been taken in by some sort of sob story. What they say doesn't matter, Julian said, his hands gripping the arms of his chair, his knuckles turning white. It matters to the Croft name, Eleanor retorted. She finally turned her icy gaze on Sarah. I don't know what game you're playing, Miss Washington, but it ends now. My son is a vulnerable man. He is not a charity case for you to exploit. Before Julian could find the words to respond, Sarah placed the final rose in the vase with a quiet, deliberate click. Mrs. Croft, she said, her voice shaking but firm. I am not playing a game. I am a mother trying to provide for my child. Your son offered me a job, and I am doing it with dignity. The only thing I have taken from him is the suffocating silence I found when I arrived here. Eleanor was momentarily speechless, taken aback by Sarah's composure and directness. You speak of your son's vulnerability. Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength as she found her footing. But have you asked him if he's happy? Have you seen him truly smile in the last 20 years? My daughter has made him smile. If that is exploitation, then I am guilty. Julian looked from his mother's enraged face to Sarah's proud, defiant one. For 2 decades he had ceded his life to the opinions of others. His mother's disappointment, his friends' pity, society's judgment. He had let their whispers define him and confine him. Enough, Julian said. The word was not loud, but it cut through the tension with an authority he hadn't used in years. Mother Sarah is right. This is the first time I've felt alive since the accident. She and Maya are not guests you can dismiss or staff you can intimidate. They are my family now. This is their home. If you cannot accept that, then the door is right behind you. Eleanor stared at her son as if he were a stranger. She saw not the broken, passive man she pitied, but someone who had finally found something to fight for. Without another word, her face a mask of wounded pride, she turned and swept out of the house. In the ensuing silence, Sarah let out a long, shuddering breath. Maya, who had been hiding in the doorway, ran to hug her mother's legs. Julian wheeled himself over and placed a hand on Sarah's arm. The siege from the outside had just begun, but within those walls, a fortress of 3 had just been forged in fire. The confrontation with Eleanor, as jarring as it was, had a cementing effect on their small, unconventional household. Julian had drawn a line in the sand, not just for his mother, but for himself. He had chosen this new life, this new family, and in doing so, had found a strength he thought long dead. The routine continued, but now it was underpinned by a shared sense of purpose. They were a fortress of 3, and the feeling was surprisingly invigorating. The miracles also continued. One afternoon, while reading in his study, Julian dropped his book. As he instinctively leaned forward to retrieve it, he felt a powerful, shocking sensation. Not a phantom twitch, but a deep, coiling clench in his right thigh, a muscle contracting with intent. It was weak, it was fleeting, but it was his. He stared at his leg, his heart hammering in his chest. For 2 decades it had been an inert object. Now it had answered a command he hadn't even consciously given. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, insisted on a doctor's visit when he told her, "Hope is one thing, Julian. False hope is cruel. We need to know what we're dealing with." Dr. Evans, the neurologist, who had managed Julian's case for years, was professionally skeptical, his face a mask of careful neutrality. After a series of tests, he sat back frowning at the results displayed on a monitor. "This is anomalous," he said, finally tapping a screen showing nerve conductivity readings. "There's a marginal but statistically significant increase in signal response in your lumbar region. Medically, it's inexplicable. Have you been trying any new experimental treatments? Unorthodox physical therapy?" "Just a new brand of hope, doctor," Julian said with a small smile. Evans's eyes narrowed slightly, his professionalism a thin veil over his doubt. "Hope is not a clinical variable, Julian," he said coolly. "Has anyone been administering anything to you, altering your diet, your medication?" His gaze drifted for a split second towards the doorway, where Sarah and Maya were waiting, a flicker of suspicion that was gone as quickly as it came. With patients of significant means, we sometimes see external factors trying to manufacture the appearance of improvement for personal gain. I'm sure that's not the case here, but I have to ask. The implication hung in the air, clinical but ugly. "No," Julian said, his voice turning to ice. "Nothing has changed but my outlook on life." The news of Julian's inexplicable improvement did not stay within the sterile walls of the hospital. A nurse mentioned it to a friend who mentioned it to her hairdresser, who happened to style the hair of Evelyn Vance. Evelyn, Julian's ex-wife, had cultivated a life of elegant martyrdom since their divorce. She lived off a generous settlement, but had lost the social standing of being Mrs. Croft, a role she cherished. When she heard the news, she didn't feel joy for Julian. She felt a cold, possessive fury. She went online and saw the tabloid photos, Julian smiling in his garden, with a black woman and a small child. To her, this wasn't a recovery. It was a public disgrace. Her brilliant, powerful Julian, the man who had once dominated boardrooms, was being reduced to a sideshow, a spectacle of pity being cared for by a woman she saw as a low-class predator. It was a stain on her history, on the legacy she had been a part of. "He's clearly not of sound mind," she said to her lawyer later that day, her voice trembling with a righteous indignation that was entirely genuine to her. "This woman and her child have somehow brainwashed him. They're manipulating him, probably drugging him to create these symptoms, so they can get his money. He needs to be protected from himself and from them." Her motivation wasn't purely financial. It was about control. It was about restoring what she considered the proper order of things. Julian Croft belonged in a world of quiet dignity and respect, not in a tabloid narrative with a poor black family. She would save him, even if it meant destroying his newfound happiness. "We'll file for a conservatorship," she declared, her eyes hard as diamonds. "We will prove he is mentally incompetent and being medically exploited. It's my duty as the woman who knew him best." The war was no longer one of whispers. It was about to become one of writs and subpoenas. Evelyn's decision to file for a conservatorship marked the official start of a war. But every war needs spies and soldiers on the ground. Her first and most crucial asset was already inside the fortress walls. Agnes saw the changes in the house, not as a rebirth, but as a desecration. For 30 years, she had been the silent, loyal warden of Julian Croft's world. She had tended to the man in his prime and cared for the broken shell he became. Her loyalty was to the idea of the Croft family, its prestige, its order, its quiet grandeur. Sarah and Maya were an aberration, a disruption of that sacred order. Her prejudice was not loud or violent, but a deep, quiet conviction woven into the fabric of her being. She saw Sarah's efficiency, not as competence, but as ambition. She saw Maya's affection for Julian, not as innocence, but as a coached performance. In her mind, she was the sole remaining guardian of the true Croft legacy, and it was under attack. The moment that solidified her resolve came on a Tuesday afternoon. She overheard Julian laughing in the garden, a deep, genuine laugh as Maya tried to teach him a clapping game. The sound didn't warm her. It chilled her. It was the laugh of a man who was no longer her Mr. Croft. He was becoming someone else, someone she didn't recognize and couldn't control. That evening, she found the business card of Evelyn Vance's lawyer. With hands that trembled not with fear, but with righteous purpose, she dialed the number. "I am the housekeeper at the Croft estate," she said, her voice a low conspiratorial whisper. "I have information. For Mrs. Vance. About the woman Sarah Washington. I see things. She goes through his desk when he's asleep. The child is a spy listening to every phone call. They're isolating him. I fear for his safety." Every word was a lie, a distortion of innocent actions twisted through the lens of her bias. Sarah organizing files became rifling through his desk. Maya quietly playing nearby became spying. But Agnes delivered them with the absolute conviction of a whistleblower. She wasn't just a housekeeper. She was a protector. This was her duty. A week later, Sarah was looking for cleaning supplies in a back storage room when she heard Agnes's voice from the adjacent pantry. "Yes, I'll testify. They have him completely wrapped around their finger. It's a form of abuse, that's what it is. Financial documents. I'll keep my eyes open for anything else you can use." The blood drained from Sarah's face. The polite smiles, the clipped sentences, the subtle coldness from Agnes, it all clicked into place. It wasn't just dislike. It was active sabotage. That evening, after Maya was asleep, Sarah confronted her in the kitchen. "Agnes, I heard you. On the phone with Evelyn's lawyer. Why are you inventing lies about us, about a child?" Agnes didn't flinch. She turned from the sink where she was polishing silver, her eyes cold and steady. "I am protecting this family. Something you wouldn't understand. You arrived with nothing, and now you live like a queen. I am loyal to Mr. Croft and his legacy, not to his unfortunate whims." "Whims?" Sarah's voice trembled with rage. "He is happy, Agnes. He is healing. Is that so offensive to you? Because we're the ones who brought it." "You brought disorder," Agnes hissed. "You don't belong here." "What's going on?" Julian's voice cut through the tension. He had wheeled himself to the kitchen doorway, his face a mask of confusion having heard the raised voices. Tears of anger and humiliation streamed down Sarah's face. "She's been feeding them lies, Julian Agnes. She's been working with Evelyn building her case against us. She's the source of all of it." Julian stared at Agnes, the woman who had bathed his wounds, who had sat with him through countless sleepless nights, whom he had trusted implicitly for 3 decades. He searched her face for denial, for any sign of remorse, but found only a stubborn, righteous certainty. "I did what was necessary," Agnes said, lifting her chin, "to protect you from them. They will ruin you." The realization hit Julian like a physical blow. The deepest betrayals don't come from enemies, but from those who believe they are acting out of love. He saw that her loyalty wasn't to him, the man, but to a past he no longer wanted. Her care was intertwined with a prejudice so deep she couldn't see it herself. The room was heavy with the weight of 30 years of shared history. Finally, Julian spoke, his voice quiet, but absolute, the words costing him more than she could ever know. "Agnes, you will pack your things. Your service here is terminated." She gasped, her composure finally cracking. "Mr. Croft, after all I have done for you." "That is precisely why," Julian said, his heart aching with the pain of the amputation. "You have done enough." He was not just firing a housekeeper. He was exiling a piece of his own past to protect his future. The dismissal of Agnes left a new kind of silence in the house, not the sterile quiet of before, but the clean, empty space left after a fever has broken. Julian's painful decision had been a final severing from his past. There was no turning back. Now all that was left was the public battle. The courtroom was a circus. Media vans lined the street, and reporters jostled for position, eager for a glimpse of the key players in a drama that had everything: old money, disability, race, and a fortune hanging in the balance. Evelyn Vance, dressed in somber, elegant gray, played the part of the concerned ex-wife perfectly. Her lawyer was sharp, ruthless, and skilled at weaving a narrative. He painted a picture of Julian as a lonely, mentally fragile man, easily swayed by a cunning and predatory woman who had preyed on his vulnerability. His star witness was Agnes. Vengeful and emboldened by her dismissal, she took the stand and delivered a masterful performance. Her testimony, a tapestry of half-truths and outright lies, delivered with tearful, convincing sincerity. "I saw her with his financial statements." Agnes wept, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. She would whisper to him for hours. He became a different person, angry and secretive. He cut off everyone who truly cared for him, his own mother, even me, all on her orders. Julian's lawyer fought back, but the narrative was powerful, playing on the jury's deepest biases. When Julian himself took the stand, the opposing lawyer's questions were like daggers. "Mr. Croft, isn't it true that you signed over household management and its significant budget to Ms. Washington just 2 weeks after meeting her? Isn't it true that your supposed recovery began only after she and her mother gained full control of your daily medication schedule? Isn't it true that you have cast aside your family and your most loyal servant because of her influence?" Julian answered calmly, denying the ugly insinuations, but he could feel the jury's skepticism. In the gallery, he saw Beatrice Sterling watching her expression, one of smug vindication, as if all her worst suspicions had been confirmed. The turning point came when Evelyn's lawyer, in a move of theatrical cruelty, called his final witness. "The defense calls Maya Washington to the stand." A shocked gasp went through the courtroom. Sarah shot to her feet. "Objection. She is 7 years old. She is at the very center of the alleged manipulation, Your Honor," the lawyer argued smoothly. "The jury needs to see for themselves the nature of this influence." The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Miller, looked conflicted. but reluctantly agreed. "I will allow it, but tread carefully, counselor." Maya, small and solemn in a simple blue dress, was helped onto the massive witness stand. She looked tiny, her feet not touching the floor. The lawyer approached her with a syrupy sweet voice. "Maya," he began, "do you like living in the big house with Mr. Croft?" "Yes, sir." "Does your mommy tell you to be extra nice to him so he'll keep letting you stay there?" "My mommy tells me to be nice to everyone," she replied simply. "Has your mommy ever told you to ask Mr. Croft for things? For money for toys?" Maya shook her head, her brow furrowed in confusion. "No, sir. She said we don't ask for things. We earn them. And Mr. Julian is my friend. I don't ask my friends for money." The lawyer's smile faltered. "Your friend? And what do you do for your friend?" "I help him," Maya said, her voice clear and ringing through the silent room. "I tell his legs to wake up, and I make him laugh because his heart was sad." She looked directly at the jury, her expression earnest. "He wasn't using his heart, so I think it got sad, just like his legs. But it's getting better now." A hush fell over the room so profound that a cough from the back row sounded like a gunshot. The lawyer, completely flustered, tried one last time. "And what did you get in return for all this?" "Help. He gave me a home," Maya said, "and he promised to teach me how to play chess." In that moment, the complex legal arguments, the insinuations, and the public narrative collapsed under the weight of a child's profound, unshakable truth. The lawyer had nothing further to ask. As Maya was helped down from the stand, Julian looked at the jury and saw their expressions had changed completely from suspicion to empathy. A fire he hadn't felt in decades surged through him. It wasn't just in his heart. It was in his legs. The fire in Julian's legs was an undeniable electric current. As his lawyer rose to speak, Julian held up a hand, a gesture that silenced the murmuring courtroom. "The defense calls Julian Croft back to the stand," his lawyer announced, sensing the shift in the room. But Julian shook his head. "No," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying with an astonishing authority. He looked at Sarah, whose face was a mask of hope and terror, and at Maya, whose small face was filled with absolute belief. He took a deep, shuddering breath. "Not to the stand." With a grunt of pure agonizing effort that echoed the groan of his own soul breaking free, he pushed against the arms of his wheelchair. His legs, atrophied and useless for 20 years, trembled violently. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Evelyn's face went pale with disbelief. Eleanor in the front row brought her hands to her mouth, tears already streaming. Inch by agonizing inch he rose. He was unsteady, leaning heavily on the polished wood of the witness box, his body screaming in protest. But he was standing, on his own 2 feet. He let go of the box and took one shaky, miraculous step toward the center of the courtroom. Then another. The silence was broken by a single sharp sob from Sarah, which was followed by a wave of stunned applause that swelled until it shook the very foundations of the room. Reporters scrambled, their cameras flashing relentlessly, but all Julian saw was Maya's face, beaming with a triumphant, "I told you so." Judge Miller banged her gavel, not for order, but for emphasis, a wide, incredulous smile on her face. "In light of this demonstration," she said, her voice full of emotion, "and the complete lack of credible evidence of exploitation, this court finds the petition for conservatorship to be entirely without merit. Case dismissed." The aftermath was a tidal wave. The media narrative flipped instantly from a sordid scandal to an inspirational miracle. Evelyn Vance left the courthouse alone, her elegant facade shattered, leaving her isolated and consumed by a bitterness that would be her only companion. A few days later, a large pot of prized hydrangeas appeared on the Croft mansion's front steps, with no card. Beatrice Sterling had offered her awkward, silent apology. That evening, the 4 of them, Julian, Sarah, Maya, and Eleanor, who had tearfully begged for and received forgiveness, sat together in the garden as dusk settled. The air was filled with a peace that felt more profound than just the absence of conflict. It was the peace of an earned victory. Julian, leaning on a cane but standing tall, turned to Sarah. "They tried to tear us down with lies about money and manipulation," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But they never understood what this was about." He looked at Maya, who was chasing fireflies in the twilight, and then back at Sarah, whose strength had been his anchor, whose dignity had been his shield. "Sarah Washington," he said, and slowly, carefully he knelt on one knee. It was a clumsy, imperfect movement, but it was the most graceful and meaningful act of his life. "You and Maya taught me that a home isn't built with stone and marble, but with courage, trust, and love. You rescued me from a prison I built for myself. Will you do me the honor of marrying me and making this new foundation permanent?" Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she pulled him up into her arms, her answer lost in a kiss that sealed their future. Maya ran to them, squeezing them both in a fierce, joyful hug. Eleanor watched from the porch, her heart full. The whispers of the world outside had finally been silenced, replaced by the sound of a family's laughter. They had faced the trial of perception, and had not only won, but had built something new and beautiful from the ashes of old prejudice.